Good morning, class. Today we are going to start reading from page number 81 of chapter number 7, Database and DBMS, an introduction, and the topic is structure of database. A database contains a specific structure to store data. Let us study some basic terminologies used in a database that will help us in getting acquainted with the functioning of a database. So a database contains a specific structure to store data. Now we will study all these terminologies that are used in a database. First is tables. Tables are the building blocks of a database. They store the complete data in a structured manner, that is, in the form of rows and columns. Every table has a finite number of columns and rows. So tables is a collection of related data held in a table format within a database. It consists of rows and columns. These are the elements of a table. First is field, second records, third data. Fields. All columns in a table are called fields. जितने भी columns tables में हैं, that all are the fields. For example, roll number, father's name, English, maths, Hindi. These all are the field in a table. A field describes a particular attribute of all the records in a table. So what is a field? Field describes a particular attribute of all the records in a table. For example, the field that mentions the roll number of the table students, it will store the roll numbers of all the students. So this is the roll number field of students table, and roll number field will store roll numbers of all the students. English field will store English marks of all the students. Hindi field stores Hindi marks of all the students. Next is records. A row in a table are called records, and a row in a table, this is called records. There are 3 records in a student table. A record contains the value for all the fields that belong to a single person or an entity. So record contain the values for all the fields that belong to a single person or an entity. For example, when we enter data of all the fields such as roll number, father's name, full name, marks for a given student, it creates a new row in a table which is called a record. So when we enter data of all the fields, जितनी भी fields हैं हमारी table student में, there are roll number, full name and marks for a given student, it will create a new row and that is known as a record. For example, roll number is 1, full name is Sandeep, English marks is 89, Maths marks is 79, Hindi marks is 60. So it creates a row in a table and that is known as a record. All the columns in a table are called fields and a row in a table is called records. Next is data. A set of characters that represents a valid value is known as data. So set of characters that represents a valid value, that is known as data. For example, 3, Deepti, 90, 88 and 70, these are the data values. It represents a valid value for the specific fields of a student. 3 represents valid value for roll number field, Deepti for full name field, 90 for English field, 88 for maths field and 70 for Hindi field. So these are the 3 elements. First is field. Field is all the columns in a table is called as a field, and it describes a particular attribute of all the records. records. The row in a table is called record, and it contains value for all the fields that belong to a particular person or an entity. And data is a set of characters that represents a valid value. Queries. A database stores vast amount of data, but queries help us to retrieve the filtered data based upon some conditions. Queries are also used to perform actions such as delete, update, etc. on the data based upon some criteria conditions. So queries are the simply questions that are asked against a set of data. So a data can also be manipulated using the queries. You can perform actions such as delete an record, update a record based on some conditions. So database store vast amount of data. But if you want to retrieve some filtered data, then you can use some queries. For example, in this database, if you want to know the name of students whose marks in Hindi are above 90, so it will only display the data of the student whose marks in Hindi are above 90. Next is forms. Forms are the user-friendly interfaces that facilitate the process of entering data in tables and queries. A form has an attractive interface that accepts data from the user and forwards it to the corresponding table or query. So forms basically a database object that you can use to enter, edit or display data from a table or a query. You can use forms to create a user interface for a database applications, and the form is directly connected to a data source such as table or a query, and can also be used to enter, edit or display data from that particular data source. So it has an attractive feature that will accept data from the user and forwards it to the corresponding table or a query. Next is reports. Reports are used to display the selected data in a printable format. Reports collect the summarized data from one or more tables or queries and organize it in a printable form. So reports is also a database object that is used when you want to present information in your database so as to display a summary of data, provide details about individual records. So at that place, reports are very useful as it collects the summarized data from one or more tables or queries and organize them in a printable form for the users. Next is quick quiz. Give any real life examples of database apart from the one that is given in the chapter. Databases that are used about everywhere, including banks, retail, websites and warehouses. Banks use databases to keep record of customer accounts, balances and deposits. Retail stores store prices, customer information, and warehouses stores information about the sales of the company. Let's know more. The overall design structure of the database is called database schema, which defines the records and relationship among them. So it refers to the organization of a data as a blueprint of how the database is constructed. कैसे हमने database को construct करना है. It exists both as a visual representation and as a set of formulas known as integrity constraints, using which we can govern the database. So that formulas are defined in a data definition language that is known as SQL. So it is basically a skeleton structure that represents the logical view of entire database. It defines how the data is organized and how the relationship among them are associated. It defines its entities and the relationship among them. Let's know more. DB2 is a family of relational database management system (RDBMS) products from IBM that serves a number of different operating system platforms. So DB2 is used for Linux and Unix as well as for Windows based operating system. It is a family of relational database management system products from IBM. It initially supported the relational model but were later extended to support object relational features and non-relational structures. Let's know more. A database that consists of two or more data files located at different sites on a computer network is called a distributed database. It is located on the same network or on entirely different network. Portions of database are stored in multiple physical locations and processing is distributed among multiple database nodes. So distributed databases are logically interrelated with each other and they often represent a single logical database. With distributed databases, data is physically stored across multiple sites and independently managed. The processors on each site are connected by a network.